At the top, it's cautious and it's isolation, it's cautious. I'm sorry. I know that's your picture and I respect your insecurity. But your choice, so it's because I
the front, on the back. Evacuation via the stairwells, came up by the toilets. The central staircase may be used if it's safe to do so. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point is the garden area at the side of the John Lennon Art and Design building on Brownlow Hill, accessible via a gate on Brownlow Hill. I'm assuming there's going to be people directing us to these places because I've got a clue where they are. Do not re-enter the building until the all clear has been sounded and you have been informed by security or LJMU fire marshal, who will be clearly identified in a high visual jacket. All LJMU buildings are non-smoking buildings. This includes communal areas, stairwells, lifts and toilets. Please do not smoke within 3 metres of the perimeter of the LJMU building. If you require first aid, please let a member of staff know, preferably JFU staff, because I don't think we've got any first aiders among our staff at the moment. And that's it. We're going to read that to you every day, because JFU requires it. So, right now, I'm going to invite Rihanna up.
Can everybody hear now?
Yeah. So he's going to talk to us about producer and technical staff and the quandaries they have between them and how people are paid.
Thanks, Jill. Hello, everybody, and welcome to CIM. For all of you that don't know me, my name is Rihanna, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the widespread exploitation of theatre professionals in the commercial theatre industry and what, as managers, we can do to tackle these issues. So at the moment, every time you open a theatre-oriented newspaper or go on Twitter or even TikTok, there are constant reports of exploitation from financial to physical, like the ones that I have here. Theatre workers at lowest place psychologically, talent drawn crisis as skilled workers exit theatre for TV. But what are the issues? So when speaking to a sound technician who has worked on shows in London's West End for the last 10 years, she explained that the issues were that they were underpaid and overworked, with some crews working 90-hour weeks. She said that there's a lack of transparency from producers, and she said that many people, including herself, were being exploited for their skills and talents. One might argue that there's kind of a disillusionment of what you're getting yourself into. I mean, nobody at drama school tells you that you're going to risk your safety and mental state to be in a job that you love, and nobody tells you that you'll be living in a shared house until you're in your mid-30s because you can't afford your rent. But that is what the stage is reporting. So let's talk about money. Recently, Equity, who are a performing arts and entertainment trade union, launched a campaign called Stand Up for 17%, which I will get into in more detail shortly. The campaign revealed that a shocking 61% of Equity members, which roughly equates to about 28,670 people, had considered leaving the industry, and 45% had a second job. When speaking to a performer who is currently starring on London's West End, they said that they are currently working 2 jobs. They perform 8 shows a week and also work a 9 to 5. They mentioned that they have no balance between their 2 professions and they're at the point of quitting. I can now confirm, after speaking to them yesterday, that when their contract is up in June, they will be leaving the theatre industry to go work an office job that pays significantly more. That in itself is a huge management issue currently surfacing in the industry. Supply and demand of performers, and more specifically crew members, is at an all-time low, with many people leaving the theatre industry to seek alternate jobs or taking their skills to better paying industries such as film or sport. Nordic City, who investigated the issue back in 2017, stated that the theatre and performing arts workforce, So they stated that the theatre and performing arts industry is suffering from skills gaps and skills shortages in certain areas of the offstage workforce, and they said that that will increase within the next 10 years. However, with the global issues we've endured, like the pandemic and the current cost of living crisis, that increase has come sooner than expected. So what do performers within the theatre industry get paid?
Last year, I made a video breaking down how the pay works for an off-West End show like Heather's, and people seem to find it very helpful. So now I'm going to break down how the pay works for a commercial UK tour like SpongeBob, and I'm going to give you some actual numbers. Disclaimer, I'll be sharing the equity minimum rates, which are all available to view online anyway. So let's get into it. Pay for commercial theatre is done in tiers depending on how many seats are in the theatre you're performing in. For this example, I'm going to be focusing on an 8-show week in a Tier A production, which is for theatres with between 500 to 1,499 seats. So starting with the base weekly fee for performances, which is £498.77 a week. This covers a full 8-show week, which works out at about £62.35 per show, and that includes all your time at the theatre, including warm-up, note session, rehearsal times, and of course the show. If you really break it down using my job in SpongeBob as an example, we have a 7 p.m. show, get called in at 5 o'clock, and we normally finish by about 9:30, so that's 4.5 hours in the theatre, and this would work out at about £13.86 per hour. When on tour, you also get a weekly allowance to cover your costs for accommodation and extra living costs, and this is £300 a week. On top of that, we also get our travel expenses paid from each tour location, whether that be train, petrol, flights, all covered by the company. Additional payments might include an understudy payment if you're understudying any of the roles, which is an extra £18.46 per role per week. If you then went on to perform as your cover, you would then get an understudy payment of £27.64 per show. So that's all the numbers that are all available to view online. So based on the equity minimum rates, I'm going to use my job in SpongeBob as an example to tell you how much I would come home with at the end of the month. So say I got the base fee of £498.77 a week. I cover for 2 parts, so I would get 2 separate understudy responsibility payments of £18.46 each a week. I do get £300 to cover my expenses, but that all goes directly on expenses, so I'm not counting it. So all of that per week would equal £535.69. Most musical theatre performers have an agent, and they would take a commission of between 10 to 15%. So let's meet in the middle, 12.5% goes to my agent. So before tax, I would come home with £468.73 a week. So at the end of the month, that comes to £1,874.92 before tax. So say I worked 12 months on that fee, and we all know the musical theatre industry, you could have a 12-month contract, you could have a 2-month contract, who knows? It would come to £22,499.04 per year. In 2021 and 2022, the average UK salary was £38,121 a year, according to the ONS. I'm just going to leave that there. Performing arts is a proper job, people, and our industry is filled with so many hardworking and talented people who are so passionate about putting on theatre and telling stories. Our union is working.
So that is the basic pay for a touring actor. Hannah Lowther, who is currently on tour with SpongeBob the Musical, compared her wage to the average UK salary. But I wanted to compare it to the basic London living wage, which is where the majority of theatre professionals live. So the current national living wage in London is calculated at £11.95 per hour, which for a full-time job works out at £24,856. The numbers that Hannah did mention are the equity minimum payments for people working within the industry, which is basically like our minimum wage. That being said, when looking into this a little bit further, I found a study undertaken by Equity that explained that more than 23,000 people working in the industry are on those basic fee payments. We all know that show contracts are not permanent. They can last anywhere between a one-night performance to a year, and there's very limited sick pay and no maternity leave. When speaking to Broadway World, a stage manager said, "I'm currently planning how to leave stage management, the job I love and have done for a decade, because I want to have kids in a year or two, and I don't see it being possible if I'm working in live theatre." The hours are relentless and you don't earn enough money to be able to afford childcare, let alone shoes and books. I've worked so hard, I'm really proud of myself and my skills I've built up, but if this is the height of my career already, then that is not sustainable. For managers, this is presenting major challenges to talent retention within the industry, because as mentioned before, many are leaving and taking their skills elsewhere. The tragedy here is that there's not much that can be done to change this, as most producers simply do not have the profit margin to pay more. When questioned on the issue, Ashley Herman, who is the founder and CEO of Playing Field Productions, said yes, actors should be paid properly, but it's not as easy as that. Another issue that has been really dominant in the media the last year or so is theatre digs, which is accommodation for anyone that's either relocated to be in a show or is currently on tour. Last year, theatre digs took over the media, with numerous people complaining about the digs they were staying in and saying that they were too far away from the theatre, extremely unsafe and reliable. And this was because expenses were not enough to cover better digs. With actors such as Rob Madge, who is the writer and stars in My Sons Are Queer, speaking out on the issue. Rob tweeted saying that the way the current accommodation system works seriously puts them off ever wanting to tour again. They go on to say that we deserve to feel safe, and as it stands, we do not. 71% of equity members reported that they felt unsafe on tour, which resulted in expenses being increased from £265 to £300. But like most things, the cost of digs has gone up due to the cost of living crisis, with people such as Hannah Lowther once again in a vulnerable state. Hannah spoke out on the issue just last week, saying, controversial opinion, £47 a day on tour still doesn't cover the cost of safe and reliable accommodation. Some cities are so expensive, and this came about after her accommodation in Manchester fell through and she was left without nowhere to stay. Charlotte Bent, who is an equity representative, told arts professionals India Stoughton that she thinks the scale of the problem at the moment is not as obvious to producers as it needs to be, because a lot of them are not taking responsibility that they need to for the safety of their workforce when they're working away from home. Theatre has taken a major financial hit over the last 3 years, with some producers and productions still in a vulnerable financial state. Increasing costs to things such as theatre digs and actors' wages will only add to that, creating bigger financial issues for producers and risk investor retention. Ashley Herman stated that it's a balancing act, and as producers, there is so much to consider when producing a show. Yes, I know you're all thinking it. That picture right there was used by the stage in their article about theatre digs. It later came out that that is not a picture of theatre digs, and they did it for attention. So, in 2020, Parents and Carers in Performing Arts, PIPA, who addressed a lack of provision for parents and carers in the performing arts, published a report that identifies that theatre workers who are also parents and carers are experiencing poor working conditions with high demands but little to no support from their employers. The main themes in the report demonstrate tough working conditions for backstage workers, indicating a potential impact on well-being. 330 people participated in a survey that resulted in 95% respondents saying that they had concerns about their work-life balance. Nearly half reported that they had raised their concerns with their employer, but fewer than 1 in 10 had seen any positive change. The other half didn't raise any worries because they feared the impact of their career and believed that nothing would change. So producers are losing their staff. And as mentioned, supply and demand is at an all-time low. So what as managers can we implement? Before revealing to you what managers can do, I wanted to share with you a very well-known case study. Cinderella, which was recently renamed as Bad Cinderella, made headlines last year after composer and producer Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber made the decision to cancel the show. His handling of this matter has generated much controversy and raised questions about ethical practices. Last year, the cast and crew of Cinderella were informed that the show would close almost immediately and their contracts would be terminated via Twitter, with Lloyd Webber stating that the show is a costly mistake. Leading lady who inspired the show's creation, Carrie Hope Fletcher, had been informed of the show's closing by other cast members, and it was reported that there was no efforts made to contact any of the cast before it was public knowledge. New cast and stage management had recently been hired and were due to start work soon. These professionals had planned their lives around what they thought was going to be their next job. That included expected future earnings, accommodation arrangements, and even turning down other work. Some of the cast have also said that they were currently in costume fittings and shoe fittings and thought that nothing was wrong. Imagine, Jill, you're imagining, that you've just spent the last 2 years in a pandemic, you've made no money, and then you get offered a job, you move back to London only to be told you've lost the job via Twitter. Many took to their own socials to react to the way the staff had been treated, with one person saying #Cinderella, shocking and unforgiving from a man who has earned so much from this insecure profession, to dismiss those desperate to work by social media. #Andrew Lloyd Webber, the business is tough enough as it is. So last Friday, Ashley Herman explained to us all that a musical costs anywhere around 10 million to produce at the moment, and each week costs tens of thousands of pounds to keep it running. And if the show doesn't make that money, a venue is rightfully allowed to evict a show. Cinderella was unable to meet the margins of the running cost payments, which is a major concern for managers and is what resulted in its close. This costly production, however, actually opened on Broadway of March this year. So the issues presented are affecting the management of commercial theatre, and as producers are at risk of losing their professionals, and as mentioned, supply and demand is at an all-time low. With wages and dig payments going up, so is the cost of production, which could trigger the risk of losing investors. As we all know, what is presented in the media isn't always completely true, and many producers' reputations are also being destroyed due to the accusations presented. If the widespread exploitation does continue, the industry could end up on strike. As we all know, striking action is a major trend at the moment, with many professionals rightfully striking, and reports have been made that the theatre industry could be next to join the picket line. A strike would cause major issues for managers, with pretty much every musical in town being affected. The financial strain this would have on the industry after the last 3 years could have major long-term effects. Although there were a couple of Broadway strikes in the 2000s and the National Theatre had a wildcat strike in the late 70s, these all hail for musicians and backstage workers. A mass walkout of West End professionals would be pretty much unprecedented. So what as managers can we do to prevent this? There are several campaigns in motion at the moment that shine light on issues, such as Stand Up for 17%, a new campaign led by Equity, which has an aim to increase weekly payments by 17%. It's also calling for a 5-day rehearsal week, a rise to 34 days holiday minimum, an increase to swing payments and covering rates, an increase to relocation allowances, which will impact dig payments, an additional 1 week sick pay, and a limit on holiday embargoes. Equity also have a live campaign designed to tackle the issues with digs. The Dignity in Digs claim went live in March this year. The claim believes that producers should take more responsibility for sourcing and providing accommodation for theatre workers, and that allowances should be restructured to allow a clear distinction between what professionals get paid to pay for accommodation and what they have for daily expenses. It's also asking for a consideration of an increase in the sub-payments from 300 to 400, as previously mentioned. I think we'll see the effects of this come into place in the next coming weeks. So when speaking to a Northern-based commercial producer, they said that we can, as managers, can definitely implement procedures such as a 5-day rehearsal week. We can listen to what theatre professionals are saying and work with Equity to improve payments and make sure our staff are properly paid, and also put the necessary procedures in place to protect them. They also said that producers can increase backstage workforce monitoring to better understand current work demands and risks to well-being, and also improve lines of communication to encourage dialogue and transparency about the challenges experienced, and most importantly, take responsibility. While guidelines such as Stand Up for 17% and PIPA have highlighted the mentioned issues, it is essential that managers and producers action against them. That being said, when speaking to some current managers and producers within the industry, I encountered some restraints, with one saying that this happens every few years. There is a lack of understanding when it comes to the change in attitude, with one producer saying that theatre has always been this way, and we have to have a the show must go on attitude. One manager also stated that equity demands something new from us every month, and we usually say yes to avoid strikes. However, we can't agree to everything, and there has to be a pinch somewhere. In his masterclass last week, Ashley Herman said that the industry is a show business. There is some action that is being implemented, and I did want to share with you what has happened this month. So it was announced that minimum rates of pay will increase by 5% in the next year, and producers are committed to working to address the issues theatre workers are having with digs. Responsibility payments are to be increased, and it was announced just last week that a 5-day rehearsal period is to be trialled, and Cinderella announced it was closing on Broadway after only 3 months. So what more can be done? I think a greater transparency can be had from producers in terms of financial responsibility. Money in UK theatre is so hush-hush, and I think it goes against producers quite a bit. I also think that there is an employment opportunity for an accommodation booker for professionals. Producers go as far as booking transport, so that can be extended to booking accommodation. Even having something as simple as a digs list that can be created and provided to all cast and crew, which ensures safety and reliability. So there is my bibliography, and thank you, Senator, for helping me.
To say, wow, Rihanna, that was so informative. Being someone that's worked in theatre for many years, it can be a little bit crucifying. I don't want to put anyone off, by the way. I suppose those people that go into theatre and TV and film, it is for the love of it.
Yeah.
But as you were speaking, I was thinking loads of things and taking lots of notes. And what I do think one of the solutions could be is that the standard should be the same and the pay and everything the same as TV.
Yeah.
Because it's entertainment, so why is it so low? Why is it so different? You know, so the people that are making the decisions about how people get paid in TV, why aren't they making the same decisions about theatre? So I think we've done some in-depth research there. I think, you know, people are going to go away with a lot of information, but hopefully people are still feeling passionate about what they do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sinead and then Polly. Ready? Sinead and then Polly.
So do you think that if this problem persists, it could be the end of theatre like as we know it?
Personally, I don't think it'll be the end of theatre. I do think that we are going in the right way of having a strike. I think that'll be the next step. And if that does happen, I think it'll be so catastrophic to producers that they won't let it get to that point. And I think there will be a change somewhere. Where the money for that change is going to come, though, who knows? I think there's a wider conversation to be had with investors and people who fund theatre, and the big top 3 producers in the UK can probably afford to pay a lot more than what they actually are. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be the end of theatre. I think we're about to hit a big change.
Well done, Ray.
Thanks.
Very proud of you.
Thank you.
So my question is, as a young professional about to enter the industry, well, you already have you had any personal experiences of what you just explained that would maybe question that you want to go into this industry going forward?
Personally, no, I haven't had any experiences, but I also haven't worked in this sector of the industry yet. So obviously, I'm going into working in the subsidised sector. I've worked in the subsidised sector for the last 3 years, but it works a little bit differently. So no, I haven't encountered anything as of yet, but when I do, I'll let you know.
Anybody else got a question? Who wrote that?
I was wondering, being that you looked at the UK did you look at the US at all for the theater industry inside there, and like maybe what background or the way their pay structure works in like terms of like if it's better or better for the artist?
Yeah, so I actually did look into America's pay because their pay works so different, and ours is based off tiers, so it's based off the size of the theatre. So if someone's working in say a 300-seater theatre, they'll be getting paid someone totally different who's working in a 3,000-seater theatre. Whereas in America, it's a standard pay for all actors, which is quite significantly more as well. They also are really open with their finances, so you can actually see on a website how much every single theatre show is making that week, if it's meeting its margins, if it's not, where the money is going. In America, they're a lot more open to talking about finances, whereas here they're not at all. And I think if we adopt for a more American model, we might stop seeing so much restraint because people will see how much a show is actually making versus just having this idea of what it is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any last questions? No? Thank you, Rosie. Before we put the producer's video on, it's break first. Sorry? It's the break first. Before the producer's video. All right. Well, before the break, can I just remind you all that you need to be tweeting to our Twitter page, using that hashtag or that, tagging them in to that app. So if we can all start tweeting, please, and getting us out there. We can only break now, and then we'll do the producer's video. Okay? Thank you.
There's also low back pain. They have to send me to cardio, the gym, and so next week after the conference, I'm gonna start I miss some water.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
No, I'm okay.
But it was yeah, I just think yes. I was reading it last night. It was, I made a note because I was yeah, it says, don't know that. You can see that in the back page.
Yeah, it's not bad.
What yeah. Have to read from and stuff. But politically, he's popular. But politically,
Yeah.
Everybody's laughing.
No worries. Yes.
Right, we'll stick the producer's video on now, and anyone who comes and just scribble in before bed, his presentation. So this producer's video is by Zosha and Ruth.
I'm Sean, I'm the principal of LIPA, and welcome. Well, this is probably one of the hardest working spaces in the entire institution, to be honest, because during the day it's a canteen, but then it transformed in the evening to becoming a gig venue. And there are music gigs here literally Monday to Friday, every week through term, so over 30 weeks or something like that. And there's open mic in here, and I know there are other social events. I think the Black Ball is also held in here as well. So it's a really, really, really sort of a very dynamic and a very busy venue for us. But it's I think again it goes to the heart of what LIPA is. It is that sense of collaboration, it's that sense of being dynamic, and also being about performance and about creativity. So it's it's a really, really important place. What first attracted me actually to coming here was the number of international students that are here. In the sector of small specialist institutions, we have the highest number, which is incredible. We have students from over 48 countries. So it's I think when you consider that we now live in a globalized world, and I think the influence of all those cultures, that diversity of just different cultures coming together, I think is incredible. One of the things I really loved a couple of months ago, I saw with the professional, the first years had done films based around their culture and around what brought them together, and it was really interesting to see how food was kind of the sort of the anchor, it was the thing that brought everyone together. So I think as an institution, I think we really benefit from it. Liverpool itself is obviously an international city as well, and I think it gives us a huge sort of richness, I think, as an environment, but also just as a place to be as well, and to make friends and to sort of just have those opportunities. So I think it's an incredible thing. Well, it's really about, again, it's going back to that point about the doing, isn't it? It's about being in a creative environment, but also one which is practice focused as well. It's about the repetition, the doing, and having the experience and the exposure, not just to the technique, but also working collaboratively across different programs in pursuit of putting on productions. How does that work? Through not just the learning, but through the rehearsal, through to the execution of the actual production itself, and then developing beyond that professional skills as well, and looking at developing portfolios and networks and all sorts of other attributes, if you like, which will help sort of establish our students as they move towards being graduates and then going into the creative industries. So again, it's that agility, adaptability, that resilience, all of those elements. So that's kind of how we sort of try and mix all the programs together, but we try not to separate them as well. We try to keep them collaborative and sort of leaning against each other so that they all support one another in pursuit of that common goal. We do so much, don't we? Because it's basically just a huge playground, and we do plays, we do musicals, we do concerts, we do dance shows. We also do devised performances as well, community inspired projects, but also projects which have children in them as well. So we do with our LIPA 419, so we have those sort of those youth productions as well. So it's a really broad and really diverse, and obviously on the set here of Rent as well, we have student produced productions as well. So it's incredibly diverse. And over the course of a year, I think we do somewhere in the region of around about 60 productions. But of course, when you multiply that by the number of activities, and also next door we do the Tube, Tube Extra, and Open Mic and other such things as well. It's well over 100 events in a single year. So it's a lot of live production in one institution. Okay, so looking ahead, we've got some exciting plans. We have a new strategy for 2023 to 2026, and in that we have 6 new core themes, which are excellence, equity, empowerment, entrepreneurship, employability, and environment. So we're looking to develop all of these things as we also look to get new taught degree awarding powers. What does that mean? Well, quite simply, it means that we will be an autonomous individual higher education university. So very exciting, we think.
Ben is going to talk to us about promoters. Are promoters worth it? And I'll look at the impact small local promoters have on on-site artists. So just get your...
Right. So.
Yeah, and we just...
So as Jill said, my name is Ben. So as Jill said, my name is Ben Rogers, and today I'm going to be talking to you about independent promoters and the effect they have on small and artists. So just to start off with, I'm going to start with a description of what an independent promoter is. So an independent promoter is normally an individual or a small organisation that organise gigs and normally booked small unsigned artists. Now, if there are any musicians who are in the room, you've probably worked with an independent promoter before, so you might be sat there thinking, there's nothing out of the ordinary about this, it's quite a normal concept, but that's where you'd be wrong. Now, many unsigned acts have actually had negative experiences with independent promoters and have reported that local promoters actually hamper their careers more than help them. For example, this is a quote by a band called Silver, who are an unsigned band from Pittsburgh, and they've said, the promoter calls me and asks how many tickets we sold. I said 11. He said, really, 11? Is that it? Are you kidding me? How did that happen? Now, on the surface, this obviously doesn't look like much, but it is just a small snippet into what I'll be talking to you about today. If you want further proof of this divided opinion when it comes to independent promoters, the Unsigned Guide in 2018 actually carried out a survey with unsigned musicians and asked them for their opinions on independent promoters and the results, and they've reported that the results came back overwhelmingly negative. So the first thing I'm going to do today is to gain a better understanding as to why there is such a split in opinion on independent promoters, is I'm going to weigh up the pros and cons of working with an independent promoter from an artist's point of view. Now, to do this, the first thing I did was interview Gabriel Taylor Wrigley, who's a member of an unsigned band called Plain Navy, and they've been going for about 5 years now, so his experience working with over hundreds of independent promoters really helped me put this presentation together. So when I sat down with Gabe, I asked him to take me through all the positives of working with an independent promoter and why unsigned artists, small unsigned artists, should work with them. The first thing he said to me was they really helped us get off the ground running. We didn't have much money, and using independent promoters allowed us to play shows without paying for venues. Now, as some of you may know, for unsigned artists, money can be an issue, and using an independent promoter allows the artists to keep their outgoings down to a minimum, and allows them to spend more money on other things such as a rehearsal room or marketing, which I thought was extremely important when the band started or artists is starting their career. He then went on to say that they find support bands for you to play with. This allows you to network with other bands and build relationships, which is extremely helpful when booking other shows and also allows a band to be known in their local scene. Now, everyone in this room knows that when you're trying to break into the music industry, the number one most important thing to do is network. And working with an independent promoter will allow you to be introduced to other independent promoters, booking agents, managers, and as Gabe said there, other bands. And this will obviously increase the artist's opportunity to find more gigs and be able to play more live more. Third thing Gabe mentioned was if you are new to the music industry and unaware of how to run an event, independent promoters are useful because they provide necessities including ticket links for people to pay online, artworks and PA systems. Now this makes the whole experience of playing live very easy for the artist, which is extremely useful. It also means that the artist doesn't have to spend hours and hours and hours planning their own event, and they can spend more time writing and rehearsing, which is obviously more important when they're starting a career and trying to become successful. The majority of promoters promote the event as well on social media. This is an added push for tickets. Now, obviously, if the promoter is putting on unsigned artists, then the likelihood is the artist isn't going to have, on new unsigned artists, I should say, the likelihood is that the artist isn't going to have loads of followers and loads of fans. So, with the promoter promoting it, the likelihood of the band or artist playing to half an empty room is reduced massively. And then the last thing Gabe said, and probably the most obvious one, is that the artists actually get to play live. This obviously allows them to build following and test out their material. Now, if you want proof of these positives in the real life world, all of these artists have stated in multiple interviews that the importance of independent venues and independent promoters when they all start their career, especially Oasis, who were signed by a record label when playing at an independent show put on by an independent promoter. In fact, Django, who are an art rock band based in London, were asked by the BBC what they thought of independent promoters and independent venues, and they said this: "We really cut our teeth in small venues around the UK. We toured about in our singer's brother-in-law splitter van before the first record came out, and those gigs really informed the shape of those early tracks. You have to work pretty hard to win over non-partisan crowds, but without them we wouldn't have hit the ground running." So obviously there are many positives to working with independent promoters for young artists. So I wanted to find out why there is still such a stigma around them. So the next thing I just gave was to list all the cons of working with independent promoters, and as you can see, there is quite a lot of them. So the first thing you said to me was, not all independent promoters do this, but unethical indie promoters take away a lot of the profits when you're the ones that sold the tickets. On top of this, when we first started, we were very rarely paid and we didn't know the answer, sorry. Now, as I mentioned earlier, finances are a big issue when it comes to unsigned artists. Obviously, they don't have any money. So, if you play a gig and when you're expecting to get paid and you don't get paid, this could mean that the artist can't afford a rehearsal room for the next 2 weeks or petrol money for the next gig. So this could really cancel their career. He then went on to say, all independent promoters demand ticket sales, and on a few occasions, promoters have become aggressive towards us when these demands aren't met. Now, the responsibility of selling tickets should fall on both the artists and the independent promoters' shoulders, and this goes without saying that if the responsibility falls solely on the artist, then the likelihood is that the event isn't going to sell enough tickets, and which is obviously bad for anyone. No one makes any money. Third thing Gabe went on to say was, we've had issues in the past when the gig has been postponed or cancelled and the promoter hasn't given any back money to our fans. Now, I don't know about any of you lot, but if I bought gig tickets to go watch an unsigned artist and the band had to cancel the show for whatever reason, I never got my money back, I'm probably not going to go see that band again. And most of the time, this is actually due to the promoter's fault and not the band itself's fault. So this could obviously really hamper their career. A lot of them don't care about the event itself. The onus is always on the artist to promote the event, and they rarely ever do it. This links me back to the second point where I said the onus to promote the event should fall on the artist and the promoter, not just the artist. Tickets are usually too expensive, making it hard to sell the event. This obviously isn't going to help anyone sell any tickets, and then again, no one's going to make any money. Meaning promoters aren't going to make money. A lot of the events and gigs we have played have been poorly organised. We have had to be cut from the bill because too many bands have been booked and been left out of sound checks. Now, the point Gabe is trying to make here is that once you start working with a promoter, the whole event is out of your hands, and this isn't just indie promoters, this is obviously every promoter. But the likelihood is with indie promoters that the event isn't going to be organised well enough. And if the event isn't organised well enough, then you're going to get things such as missing sound checks, having to cancel the gig because you've been cut from the bill, and other stuff like missing pipeline. There are also promoters that enforce a pay-to-play scheme, which means that artists give the promoter a fee and put on the show for you. Now this is, by now, this is pretty well known within the industry that this is just a massive scam. And no artist should be paid to play, and every time an artist plays, they should be paid, basically. And then a lot of independent promoters also expect artists to not play any gigs 3 weeks either side of the event. This is a problem for small artists as it limits other gig opportunities, leaving artists in a catch-22 situation. By doing this, promoters are actually giving unsigned artists the opportunity to play, which can be quite rare for a new band, but they're also taking away their opportunity to play at the same time. They're not allowed to play gigs 3 weeks either side, which limits the possibilities, the artist's possibilities of playing live. If you want further evidence of this, this is a quote from Jake from E for Rome, which are an unsigned band from the States. And I won't read the whole quote out to you, but it basically states that the band were booked by an independent promoter to play a show 5 hours ago. They sold a bunch of tickets, and the promoter left with over $1,000 harvested from young bands, and the bands weren't paid anyway. So the next thing I wanted to do was to try and find out why this is happening. And to do this, I interviewed a guy called Mike Swan, who is the independent in-house promoter at the independent venue, the Spinning Top, which is quite a famous venue in Stockport. And he told me that there are 5 main reasons as to why this is happening and why unsigned new artists are getting exploited. The first one was most independent promoters rely on ticket sales as their only form of income. A lot of them see it as a quick paycheck. Now, this would obviously explain why promoters are reluctant when paying their artists and trying to figure out ways to not pay the fee. Promoters feel like they can take advantage of artists as they are used to the music industry. This is an obvious one. New bands aren't going to be clued up on the music industry, and promoters just see it as a chance to rip them off. A lot of independent promoters see putting on shows as a hobby and therefore take a more relaxed approach to the ordeal. This will explain the lack of organisation and why many times bands have turned up and have to be cut from the gig or cut from the sound check. I know my band have turned up to gigs using an independent promoter and they don't even have a PA system. A promoter takes a lot of risks when putting on an event. If they feel like the event is going the way they want it to, isn't going the way they want it to, ticket sales, they are likely to put all of that pressure on the bands that have been booked. And the last thing he said was, just like the artists, a lot of independent promoters can be new to the music industry and not really understand the job they have to do, which explains the lack of organisation and care that has gone into many of these independent events. So now, as artist managers sat in this room today, we're probably going to end up managing an unsigned artist at some point over the next 3-4 years, however long you plan on doing it. So I just wanted to take you through how to spot unethical promoters and ways of getting around them. So the first thing is nothing's put in writing by the independent promoter. So if you're dealing with a new promoter, a serious warning sign is that everything isn't on the level, as if the person organising the gig won't commit to putting anything potential down on paper. This goes without saying. If they're not willing to sign anything or leave it, agree to anything on paper, then they're probably trying to cheat you out of it. They refuse to talk on the phone. It's usually not a good sign if promoters seemingly dodging difficult questions or refusing to engage properly. This just isn't talking on the phone. I know a lot of independent promoters will take 2-3 weeks just to reply to an email, and if they're doing that, then you should avoid it because obviously they're trying to work their way around the thing. The details keep changing. If you're finding that a lot of details like the running order or doors time, especially the venue details or fee, are seemingly constantly changing, this could be a sign that the promoter is not organising the event will be a failure. It's also a sign that if the fee keeps changing, that they are trying to work themselves a way of not paying their artists. And no promotion is happening. Never forget that a promoter's job is to promote the show, and if this isn't happening, it could be a sign of lack of professionalism or care for the event. So, before I conclude this presentation, I just wanted to make some recommendations to independent artist managers that are sat in this room today. The first one would be to put on your own shows. Now, I wouldn't recommend this to any artist because it does take up a lot of time. But if you're an artist manager, managing an artist, put on your own shows is a great way to go about it because you get to keep all their profits and the event is completely in your hands. So hopefully nothing will go wrong. Get to know the promoter before working with them, and this will obviously help you gauge whether or not you should be working with the promoter and get to know whether you feel like you can trust the promoter or not. Contact their previous clients. Now this links into point number 6, with us ask around to understand their reputation. Obviously, if it's an unethical promoter, they're going to have a bad reputation, and this is just an easy way to find out whether you should be working with them or not. The fourth one is making sure communication is clear. All details about the event need to be transparent, just to allow the event to run smoothly. And if this isn't happening, I would back out of the event because it's likely the event's going to be a mess. And then make sure you get a good deal and get it right if possible. Now, this obviously doesn't mean to sign contracts or anything like that. That's likely, the likelihood of that is that's not going to happen. Or even an email chain with the agreement in it, or a social media direct message would work. So to conclude the presentation, I'm going to answer the question, is working with independent promoters worth the hassle? And in my opinion, it is. It is obviously important that artists are clued up and wise enough to spot on ethical independent promoters, as they can have a huge negative impact on unsigned artists. But as you've seen from the list before and all those amazing big artists, is playing live and working with independent promoters is clearly one of the most important things an unsigned artist can do. So I'd say get yourself clued up and make sure you work with good independent promoters and you'll be fine. Any questions?
How many questions out there, please?
It's all right.
No, any questions?
Perfect, thank you. That was really good, knowledgeable. Do you think, as managers of the future, we should maybe look at more of a hybrid role and take on that responsibility of promotion as well? Is it something we should
Well,
be
yeah,
looking at?
yeah, that was my point about putting on your own show. If you put on your own show, then you become the promoter yourself, and it just makes everything a lot easier for their artists if you're looking after an artist. Yeah, I would say so.
Shaz? And then Marius next. Okay,
Yeah.
Marius.
Yeah, well done, Ben. That was good, mate. Have you had any experiences yourself working with or independent promoters?
Yeah, well, when we first started playing a while ago, like I said in the thing, we turned up to a pub that was run by an independent promoter. They didn't even have a PA system. We had to go to the game, which I know a lot about, well, I say fans, but I know a lot of our mums and dads that came to watch us. Also, recently we've been working with this independent promoter called RGM, and they made us not play gigs moving to either side of the event, which is just a pain because it takes away a lot of opportunities, and we have to commit to one gig instead of being able to take other gigs around the event.
Cheers. Do you think it's more kind of a case of the fact that these promoters are not really promoters, they're more just people who've got a flow of the venue and can just message people on Instagram? Because I think that like longevity, or just to be able to do the functioning job of promoters to bring people in, it's a cocktail lineup where people go, this promoter go on a great show, whatever. And like Evil kind of has that reputation, you kind of go, you know, put something on, it's going to be party. And I think, like I said before, at the moment, you've got kids who go, I'm going to make a bit of money here. The kids aren't going to play, and money not going to ask for any money for playing. I can get a psychedelic band, or that band, you know, acoustic band, and that's the night I'm going to get 150 quid.
Yeah, well, a lot of these independent promoters, like I said, you do it as a hobby. Don't really know what they're doing, and therefore just throw it together, like you said, to make a few quid, and then the event ends up being a nightmare. But you can usually tell from that because we turned up to gigs with dodgy promoters and not had like riders, and I mean riders is should be a necessity, you know, just to keep it for the band and stuff like that. And it's just stuff like that just shows a lack of care for the event itself. And yeah, so there's, yeah, you're right. It's just a lot of them see it as a hobby, and that's why you need to look around and try and find out the reputation first before you start going with them. Otherwise, the night's just going to be a failure.
Thanks very much. I just want to ask, like, you know, when it comes to like supports and stuff, is it more your responsibility or the promoter's responsibility from that?
It depends on the promoter. We've had times where, so when we put on our own gigs, we've booked our own support acts, but a lot of the time the promoter does just book them for you. You can obviously say to the promoter, look, our mates in a band, you put these on as well, but a lot of the time they will put on bands that are artists that they think will sell tickets. So a lot of the time it is out of your hands. Yeah.
Do you think that we should be seeing more outreach of large promotion companies supporting smaller bands and smaller promoters as well?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. Not a lot of that happens. I know SJM have just come out with a new policy sort of thing that it helps. It's like a different department that helps young bands, and will put young bands on top. But as far as I'm aware, they are the only ones to do it. And not the big promotions like SJM don't really have that small end of that, which is obviously made the whole music scene in general a lot nicer place for art.
What would your view be? Because sometimes, like I've had it in the past where a promoter, where blackmail's been involved, and you don't particularly know what to do. For example, they're saying, well, if you're doing this with this person, maybe we can't help you with your big gigs. So how would you go about? You just kind of sit there and battle through that, and just kind of say, fuck it, we'll take the better show and stick with that promoter on the road. How quickly do you put ties and it's not really.
It depends how bad the blackmail is, depends what the blackmail is doing. If it's, I suppose if it's worth doing the show, if it's a small show, I'd say try and get out of it no matter what. But then when blackmail's involved, then that can become like a police matter and all sorts. You can go to like the musicians union and get lawyers to sort out for you. So it depends on the show, and it depends on what the blackmail is doing, really.
Faye and then Howard.
Do you have any independent promoters that you would recommend in the city or around the UK?
Yeah, so E-Ball's, like we mentioned earlier, E-Ball's a really good one for Liverpool. And then there's also one called Believe, which is really good, which is based in Manchester. And then there's one for smaller artists called Sunset Promotions that do a lot of gigs in the Jacaranda, and then there's one called Vinyl House as well, which is based in Liverpool that put gigs on in the Jacaranda and Jimmy and the EBGBs as well.
I don't know if like you've heard about this, but recently there was a bit of controversy with a local photographer calling out promoters, and there's been like a whole thing going on about it, where they said that there's some promoters who are like selling tickets for £7 and then only giving £2 to the artists and making thousands and thousands. And then it was discovered that that was just £2 for one of the artists and there's £4 paid, so promoters actually out of pocket. Have you seen that there's any bit like false accusations towards any independent promoters that you might know yourself for sound and everything that have been impacted by people who are quite influential in local scenes?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know any famous cases or anything like that, but it's definitely happened to us. We've turned up to gigs before, annoyed at the promoter for not promoting the event or not getting paid enough, being like, oh, what's going on here? And then turned up and actually we're getting more than the promoter's getting, and we felt like, felt kind of bad. So, like I said, it's the reputation as well. Before you start working with one, you need to ask around and find out the reputation. And if promoters are doing that, then they will have a good reputation within the music industry scene. And so obviously you pick the ones with good reputation. But word spreads pretty quickly in the unsigned scene, and if there's a promoter ripping off artists, then the scene will know about it. So it shouldn't be too hard.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Ellie, so how important is gigging for bands at the start of their careers?
I think it's the most important thing they can do, and that as well as writing. A lot of bands tend to write 5 songs and have covers or stuff like that, and write a set and not write as much. But every band needs to be writing and playing live because, like Gabe said, playing live allows the band to master their craft, so to speak, and build an online following. So what we did, we played live for a year before we released any music. That meant when we released music, we got streams and we did really well, we got in the press and stuff like that. So I would say playing live is one of the most important things you can do, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben. Right, can we introduce our final speaker of the day, Molly Rees, who's going to talk about volunteering and whether it's exploitative or essential.
So, hello, my name is Molly, and I'm delivering my presentation today on the volunteer industry and whether it's exploitative or essential in major events. So firstly, just a bit of context on what we'll be covering today. I'm going to go over some key definitions that will be quite important later on. And then I'm going to introduce a case study, explore the arguments, elaborate a bit on the law and what volunteers have said, and then final with a conclusion. So what is the definition of volunteering? So volunteering can be defined as someone who does something willingly and without being forced or paid to do it. The words used to describe volunteering here will become important later in my presentation when cross-referenced with further research. So I've displayed some event examples that use volunteering in their operational structure. So to begin with, we have Leeds and Reading Festival. To volunteer here, you have to pay a deposit of £145 the first time you volunteer, and the second time you have to pay £95. I see from a management perspective why they do this, to ensure retainment within the volunteer programme, as it takes money and resource to recruit. However, I do see alternatively, from a volunteer perspective, why it may feel exploitative. But with the age demographic and the prospect of free tickets to the event, I understand as a business, this is the policy you may feel is necessary to attract the right candidates. If you volunteer for Leeds and Reading Festival through Oxfam as a charity, you have to pay a £250 deposit, which is £10 to £20 off the actual price of the festival, which I can see as being exploitative for those wanting to gain experience in an event-based role. Next, we have the Paris Olympics 2024, which is recruiting 45,000 volunteers. Paris have said they are the face, soul, heart, and smile of our games. Thanks to them, they will enjoy the events. Paris has nearly 50% less volunteers than the previous Tokyo Olympics, which recruited 80,000. An Olympic volunteer from that said, "I'm willing to work for free if I get a chance to see and talk to Olympians from all over the world in person." However, others did not feel this way, with economic professionals saying volunteers are lured by the powerful Olympic brand, with a hope their work might lead to connections and a full-time job. Using words such as lured creates an atmosphere around volunteering that is dark and that managers manipulate volunteers into the recruitment by false promises. The 3 conditions to apply for the Olympics is the same as most large-scale events. These are to be available for at least 12 days, to be over 18 and speak French and English. When you volunteer here, managers offer you free tickets, meals and transport. Accommodation is not provided and isn't for most large-scale volunteer programmes. Then we have Manchester Warehouse Project. You can volunteer to be a ticket scanner, which gives you free entry to the rave at about 10 to 11 when the door closed. This is aimed at students studying event management degrees. The system as a whole gives prospective event managers experience in a live venue setting whilst getting to enjoy their favourite music. The shift is around 4 hours long, so it's quite a nice balance to work for payment of a ticket, which is around £40. And next we have Eurovision. This will be my case study today, so we'll go into a bit more further detail on it, but the conditions were to be over 18, have local knowledge of Liverpool and speak English, and even better if you spoke multiple languages. There were multiple departments to choose from when volunteering for Eurovision, which were to be a host city welcomer, village volunteer, and an accessibility volunteer. So why do people volunteer? After doing a survey for primary research, I asked volunteers why they choose to do it. And these are the stats. The top 3 results all indicate that a major reason people choose to volunteer is to gain experience, as well as enhance the experience of those coming to the event. So why are people debating whether volunteering is exploitative? Some think it's a ruse to boost profit margins for large events, such as Joel Marksey, the president of the International Association of Sports Economics, who said it's clearly economic exploitation. There are multiple definitions in literature that define exploitation. It can be defined as the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work, and the action of making use of and benefiting from resources. These definitions are crucial because there is a connection between the growing concept of utilising resources and the act of enlisting volunteers as a resource. With the recent controversy around Eurovision's volunteer recruitment, I thought I would focus this as my central point for my research. For a bit of context, Culture Liverpool and the Liverpool City Council went out for recruitment for volunteers in February. They received 2,500 applications with the intention of bringing on 500 volunteers. For this, they had 1 volunteer manager who reviewed applications, liaised and managed the team of volunteers when on site and beforehand. So why was this an issue? When this was announced, the Trade Union Congress, otherwise known as the TUC, were outraged. In particular, stating, "I can't think why anyone attending any major event like Eurovision would expect anyone scanning their tickets to be not getting paid for that work." The TUC also argued that having these events is really important, but it shouldn't be to the financial detriment of those who make it happen. Within this quote, the TUC itself stated that volunteers are essential to making this event happen and that they do play a vital role. However, it correlates with what Marksey had previously said about economic exploitation to benefit the event. They strongly stated that workers should be paid, and these advertised roles look more than people might expect from volunteers. Another thing that came up was the cost of living crisis, with the TUC union saying volunteering has a role in society, but in a cost of living crisis, we are asking people to do roles and responsibilities in what looks and smells like a job. This is not the first case the cost of living crisis has been a hot topic in regard to volunteering. In a 9-month study undertaken by Volunteer Recruitment Agency in Belfast, they found the cost of living crisis has seriously impacted the number of people willing to volunteer, as they would rather spend any extra time they have picking up work and earning money instead of working for free. However, pro bono economics disagree that there has been an effect due to the cost of living crisis, with an estimated 2.5 million new young people between 18 to 34 joining the volunteer workforce across 5 organisations. If we also analyse the words in this quote, the council are asking people if they would like to uptake these roles with clear terms and conditions. However, they were not forced to do these jobs. If they were forced, this would go under our definition of exploitation. However, this was a completely consensual relationship when recruiting volunteers, making this point, in this case, invalid in the terms of exploitation. The cost of living crisis also came up in my survey, with one respondent saying that they do, however, feel cost of living crisis has affected whether they volunteer, as travel costs need to be considered. This is something volunteer managers may need to consider in their recruitment process. So back to our debate. Harry Doyle, the Cabinet Member of Culture, disagreed with the TUC. He said, volunteering gives access to fans who want to celebrate the event they love and be involved. He stated this is no different to what we have done before, and he's right. In November, in the arena in Liverpool, the World Gymnastics Championships were held. They recruited the same amount of volunteers through the same exact process, some of whom also worked for Eurovision. Mayor Joanne Anderson answered a big part of our question in this debate on whether volunteers are exploitative or essential. She said, volunteering is an integral part of holding large events in the UK. This is not the first time the unions have battled the council in regard to major events using volunteers. In 2017, an article titled Edinburgh's New Year Bash Built on Exploitation took over the city. Outrage occurred when 300 volunteers were recruited to be dancers and ambassadors in the city's famous New Year's Eve event. Trade unionists say exploitation of volunteers is morally unacceptable. Mass exploitation of volunteers will underpin Edinburgh's spectacular New Year celebration, said politicians and campaigners. MPs said it's absolutely incredible that we have people exploited and asked to work for nothing when the capital would be bringing an extraordinary amount of money. This was battled by the event organisers, who said, our volunteer roles are not in any way mandatory to the successful or safe running of our festival, but we are there to provide opportunities for people who want to get involved in major international events, either for experience, camaraderie, or any other reason, and who choose to volunteer. This does put volunteering into perspective as something that is mutually beneficial for both the event and the volunteers, without necessarily being essential. When furthering my research on the alternative argument, I found an article titled Top Tips for Managing Volunteers, where researcher Chris Martin said, there is no doubt about it that without volunteers, many events would quite simply not be able to function. Just look back to your last event and think about how many of your team consisted of volunteers. What difference did they make? A big one, I'm sure. Furthermore, on an academic paper titled The Important Role of Volunteers in Events, it made the generalized statement of all events require volunteers to make them successful. Volunteers play an important role in the implementation of the event, not only because of the skill that they bring to the event organizational process, but also because they help to reduce costs incurred in the staging of the event. So what does the law say? When researching the legal rights of volunteers are protected by, I found that event managers have a moral obligation to ensure the safety of volunteers, but not necessarily a legal one. Volunteers are not protected under employee rights, however, only under common law. The manager and organisation do have a duty of care for the volunteers, but only as much as the volunteers have for each other. This goes under the civil law that a volunteer only has the right to sue if they become injured due to someone else's negligence. However, as their status is not contractual and they are volunteering, they are excluded from most employment rights. This means legally, expenses being paid, uniforms and food being provided are entirely at the manager's discretion. Legally, there are gaps in the law to exploit the work of volunteers. However, it is a volunteers manager's job to put systems and policies in place to ensure that this is not the case, especially if they want volunteer retention and to ensure the positive prosperity of their event. This, however, does get interesting when you ask volunteers to pay a deposit, such as Reading and Leeds Festival, as the law does change on whether money being exchanged is a contractual agreement. So what do the volunteers say? When doing primary research, I asked 30 volunteers through a survey their opinions. Respondent 2 said free labour benefits large-scale events and helps build the foundations on an event gaining high profit margins. The next point I thought was quite interesting. Number 23 said, so many festivals and events are cost effective for their audiences because of the voluntary workers. I thought this was quite interesting because we don't really have the statistics on how much a ticket may cost if they had to balance books for 500 extra paid employees, the roles that volunteers fill. Respondent 9 also validated this point, saying costs could rise without volunteers. Finally, we have number 5, who spoke on how volunteers strengthen the workforce and how the community and event would be weakened without their efforts. I thought another important point made by a survey respondent on the topic of the line between exploitation and essentiality was the motive for the manager to recruit volunteers. Number 23 stated, as long as the companies organising these events are not just increasing their bottom line by taking advantage of voluntary workers, and that the saving is passed on to those wishing to attend the event, then volunteering is such a worthwhile idea, both for the event manager and the workers themselves who enjoy being part of the spectacle. So why is this a management issue? After reading various articles, such as 5 challenges for event managers and variety of volunteer managers' blogs, I curated a list of issues managers were facing and how they were solving them. So firstly, we have ethical considerations. Managers must ensure that the volunteer program at major events align to the ethical guidelines and principles. They need to consider factors such as informed consent and fair treatment. Managers should establish policies and procedures that prioritise the well-being and interests of volunteers, protecting them from potential exploitation. Next, we have volunteer engagement and retention. So managers are responsible for creating an engaging and fulfilling volunteer experience. To do this, designing roles that match volunteer skills and interests, and providing training and support, whilst recognising the volunteer contributions. By prioritising volunteer engagement and retention, managers can mitigate any concerns about exploitation and create an environment where volunteers feel valued and motivated to continue their involvement. Thirdly, we have stakeholder management. Managers are often the primary point of contact for various stakeholders, including event organisers, sponsors, and community partners. They need to effectively communicate the importance of volunteering, address any concerns or misconceptions, and promote a positive perception of volunteering as an essential and meaningful contribution to the event's success. By engaging stakeholders in dialogue and demonstrating the value of volunteering, managers can help shape a positive narrative around the issue. And lastly, we have volunteer event alignment. Managers need to align the goals and objectives of the volunteer programme with the overall event objectives. For example, with Eurovision, we were hosting on behalf of Ukraine. So volunteers were taught Ukrainian greetings and about Ukrainian culture. We must ensure that the volunteers' efforts are strategically directed towards supporting the event's success and fulfilling its purpose. By aligning this, managers can demonstrate the essential role that volunteers play in achieving overall event outcomes. So what can managers do? I spoke a bit before on what managers can do in the preparation stages, but during a live event, my survey showed that 63% of volunteers want free meals on shift provided, and another 63% want references provided by their employers. Something, in my opinion, which is very achievable to incorporate through the programme, and also a really good way to show appreciation. The difficulty comes with short planning stages and freelance contracts. So embedding volunteer programs at the beginning of the operational structure may be necessary to ensure they feel valued and as they do have a crucial part in representing and being an ambassador for your event. So in conclusion, in summary, volunteering is not mandatory. Linking back to our definition and the research showed a multifaceted debate. However, volunteering can be seen as essential due to the experience it gives those aspiring managers. While isolated exploitation cases may occur, extensive evidence supports the view that volunteering is a positive and mutually beneficial activity. If adequately structured by managers, volunteer programs will prioritise volunteers' well-being, adhere to ethical guidelines, and ensure fair treatment. By recognising and nurturing the contributions of volunteers, events and managers can harness the power of volunteerism. Thank you so much.
Well done, Molly. So when it comes to kind of advertising posts for volunteering, and they say that by doing this you'll be gaining experience to help further your career, do you think that there should be guidelines as to how effective this experience would be? Because a lot of the time I feel like a lot of volunteers find themselves kind of standing at a post, just making sure people are going in and out, and it's not actually furthering their career. So do you think that there should be something to kind of help that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the key point of advertising volunteering needs to come from the bottom. So there needs to be clear communication throughout. So if it is a case where you're just standing there, that needs to be in the advertising, that it's going to be a very stationary post, which can be good for people who have accessibility issues, and it can be a really good part of being a part of the event. But on the other hand, I think the volunteer program is really essential to put it in the operational planning stages and ask questions when planning you're going to use volunteers. So saying, why are we having them? What are they doing? What's their advantage? And making sure it's mutually beneficial. So whether it's stuff like the Manchester Warehouse Project, where people are ticket scanning to be a part of the event, but most of the time it's so they can get into the rave after, or if it's something like Eurovision, where people are really, really excited about the event, but maybe want to gain experience in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I think it's really important that they're directly what volunteers are going to be doing in that section. They're looked after and managed in that way, so they are getting that experience and do come out feeling fulfilled and that they've gained something that they didn't have before.
Well, it's really interesting. This weekend, well, like the last 2 days, I was back at home volunteering backstage at an amateur theatre production, and when I was there, everyone who was volunteering was given 100 quid to like go and get food on the last day. Do you think that this is something that can be like replicated in larger scale volunteering systems? Anytime I've volunteered, it's generally been for something quite small, and it's been something that's been really appreciated, but cards, like a couple of pints bought for us or whatever. Do you think that's something that could be easily replicated in large scale productions where there's generally going to be more money behind it, or do you think that's just something that's completely unrealistic?
I think it's hard, to be completely honest. I think there's a massive difference in managing 4 volunteers or managing 500 volunteers or 80,000 volunteers. So I think it really depends in the governance structure of the event, making sure you have enough volunteer managers to ensure that's all in place, and making sure there's no burnouts and that people are actually appreciated for the time that they are putting into the event. I do think it can happen. I think it should happen. But again, I think it needs to be a part of the operational structure of the event, and that they think about it before they employ or recruit any volunteers. They go, what are they getting back? Are they having meals? Are we doing and for the gymnastics, they did a reward scheme. So every 2 shifts, you got a new award or a new piece of merchandise when you clocked in. So I think things like that are really motivating. And at the end of the day, volunteers are your biggest ambassadors. They're what people listen to when they come to the event. So I think keeping them happy and making sure they feel valued is very important. So I think it's easier in a smaller setting to appreciate volunteers. And on a larger scale, yes, there's more money, but it might be harder to manage. So I think making sure that's done at the start is where what needs to change. I hope that answered your question.
Hello, Mal. Hello again. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Something that stuck out to me was you mentioned that one of the main reasons that people volunteer is the potential for networks to kind of expand in the events that are going on. And you mentioned the scale of things like the Tokyo Olympics having like 80,000 volunteers. Do you think there's an ethical question for the individuals that organise these events? Should they be transparent with whether they are looking to network with these individuals or simply use them for their volunteering efforts?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that quote that's like, that one of my survey people said about whether the motive of the employer, so whether it's to expand the bottom line and make sure you've always covered, or whether it's actually for a worthwhile position. I think again, it just comes from complete transparency in the recruitment process and saying like, you will, if you say you will have access to these people to talk to, then you can't, I would say it's unethical then to not give them that, because it's kind of like false, like propositioning them into the role. And that's kind of what they're getting paid in, is getting to meet those athletes. I know the gymnastics, what you volunteered for specific positions. So people were like artist managers for the athletes. So they knew that they were going to get to meet them. But there was a bit of a communication issue with other volunteers who were like, well, why can't I do that? So I think it's making sure you have clear guidelines, and if you're doing something that has multiple positions, and some people get to work really closely with athletes, and some people don't, then it's about saying in that specific job role and not just having an umbrella job role and then splitting them off. It's going, well, you can apply for these 5 different ones and they get to choose, so they know exactly what they're getting and what their experience is going to be like. Any other questions?
Hi there, brilliant presentation by the way. What do you think future managers can do to help promote volunteering at larger scale events and make it seem like something that people will want to come in from the public to do more?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it does come on reputation, which is hard to get if you're a new manager. But I think making it exciting, making it different, and doing small things like free meals is so valued. Like, even when I go on shift and I get a sandwich, I'm like, oh, thank you. So I think stuff like that is just like so important, to making sure you're like, right, you're getting fed, and then having a structure in the shift and a schedule so they know where they're going to be. And I think just showing that you're organized makes them feel organized and valued, and that you've thought about where they're going to be and their position in the organization. I think a lot of it, I know from being a volunteer myself, a lot of it comes on me, like feeling like you have a place in the event, and that people trust you with giving you tasks. So I think if you're going to be a volunteer manager, you need to not be a micromanager. Be able to give them stuff that you trust that they'll do and be responsible for that. Because as a volunteer, that's what makes you feel valued. You're like, I've got this big responsibility and they trust me with that. So I think things like that is a good starting point. And then maybe some sort of reward scheme, and including that when you're advertising, I think making sure you have a timeline before you advertise and be very specific about what you're volunteering, why you're recruiting volunteers, and what they're going to get in return. That's the key, I think, is complete transparency and delivering on that transparency.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I hope you all enjoyed yourselves today. I think we've had 6 fantastic presentations. I know 3 of them were closed this morning, but we talked about music sync, mental health and K-pop, female fan bases. That was this morning, and they were all fantastic. And then this afternoon we looked at theatre workers versus the producer relationship. The work of the producer, is it exploitative? Volunteers, are they essential or are they exploitative? And finally, the promoter that Ben did, that was very interesting. So I hope you all got something from it. Tomorrow, can we all encourage our peers to turn up, please, because there's lots of you that are not here. Level fours, especially important tomorrow, because at the end of the day, you are going to have a little meeting about what to expect next year. So what modules you will be doing, etc. How you're going to have to deal with me more because I'm not talking this year, so that will be a baptism of fire. So yeah, please encourage people to come level 5s and 6s straight. On Wednesday, we are going to have a meeting with the level 5s for what they can expect in level 6. Much easier than level 5. I'm sure level 6s will agree. Yeah. So we'll have that. We're finishing about 3:45, so it won't last long. It'll be about half an hour. And can we all try and be in for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please? Thank you.
I was going to do radio.